Okay.
So we now have the final panel of today, which is about the next generation of ship owners. And here to introduce and moderate the panel is Hera Gisholt. So I leave it in good hands.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So it seems that our industry has been through several interesting years, and some might even call it an apocalypse scenario, with all the regulatory changes, the hardening markets, global geopolitical turmoil, and uncertainty. So it is my distinct honor to guide a discussion amongst younger leaders who thankfully not only have not given up on shipping, but find the challenges and changes to be breakthroughs and possibly even necessary in order to elevate our industry. We have a short period of time, so we're going to break this into 3 segments. First, I will introduce our panelists. Then we will go into Q&A with a little bit of a twist. And lastly, we'll ask the audience to pose their questions, and please direct your question to a panelist at the beginning. So let's begin. To my left is George Mangos, who's the director of InterUnity Management, a family-run Greek shipping operator of fleet of tankers and dry vessels. George joined InterUnity in 2004 after studying law and working in corporate finance and investment banking. He oversees InterUnity's commercial functions, including its co-investment strategies in shipping with major institutional investors. In addition to his work at InterUnity, George is on the advisory board of Amplifier Labs, which is Christian Oldendorf's technology incubator focused on the funding and implementation of new maritime technologies. To his left, we have Irene Marinakis, the Deputy Operations Manager at Marinakis Chartering. Irene graduated from Boston College and continued her studies at NYU, where she received a master's in global affairs. Graduating during the start of recession, she decided to go outside her field and take a job in the office of dean at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine, focusing on financial conflicts of interest in research. After nearly 3 years there, she decided to move to Shanghai to learn about shipping and to further her study of Mandarin. She spent 18 months living there and returned to New York in the summer of 2013 to work at Marinakis Chartering, which is an operator of a fleet of bulk carriers. Currently, she's responsible for operations, business development, and insurance. To her left is Stefanos Kasselakis, the founder and CEO of Swipbulk, a New York-based owner of dry bulk carriers and product tankers, who also sits on the board of Philadelphia Coatings. After graduating from University of Pennsylvania, Stefanos started his career at Goldman Sachs, where he spent 5 years in the commodities group. Stefanos is multilingual and enjoys speaking French, German, and Spanish. Feel free to address any questions during Q&A in any of these languages. He loves visiting the crew on board the vessels, which you can check on his Facebook page, and is passionate about integrating new technologies. And last but not least, we have DJ Kurtz, who manages business development and strategy for Keystone Shipping Company, a U.S. flag, Jones Act compliant, family-owned business that has been in operation for more than 100 years. DJ received his degrees in English and business from Villanova University and MBA from Boston College, with a focus in supply chains and analytics. Today, DJ represents the 4th generation of Kurt's family ownership of Keystone Shipping. In addition to his role in business development, he manages fleet analytics, charter interfacing, and corporate strategy. So we do see a bit of a trend from the bios of our panelists, with this generation focusing a lot on connecting through learning multiple foreign languages, as well as understanding and using data and technology already. I would like to start this Q&A by asking all 4 of you, actually, what was the main reason you decided to enter shipping? And although some of you joined a family-owned business, there must have been a point in time that you decided to get into shipping rather than doing something else. So what was that point in time? And for the self-starters, why shipping? George, you want to go first?
I figured I'd pass it over to a self-starter because it'll be a more interesting perspective. rather than sort of the multi-generational.
Sure.
Okay. The answer to the question why shipping is very short. I don't know. For me personally, it's about 4 or 5 years ago attending this very event in 2016. I remember the Baltic rates were at the 40-year lows, 40-year lows, and it got me thinking that this was a generational opportunity to enter this business. That theoretically, I might have to wait a whole other 40 years to get an opportunity like this. And at the same time, it was a period where the industry had gone through a lot of scrutiny on the corporate governance front. And so I thought that, you know what, I can bridge these two cultures, being that I have grown up in Greece, but also moved here at the age of 14 and attended schooling here since and worked here. And I said to myself, if we can get the best of Greek engineering and we can get the best of American financial engineering and corporate governance, then maybe we can create a special company over the long run. And obviously, I didn't know at the time, as I was pursuing my idea of how difficult the capital raising process would be. I didn't know, but I literally didn't estimate it, which was very helpful, because one of the things where an entrepreneur you have to do is suspend disbelief. You have to misprice your risk, and that's actually seriously something that venture capitalists in San Francisco look a lot for. It's people who really don't, who will chase the non-linearity. Now that takes a cost in your personal life, and you have to optimize it, being a social being with the rest of your life. But for me at that point we knew that 2016 was not sustainable. At the end of the day, we're in a commodity business that has a cost of production, right, like any other commodity. So it would mean revert at some point. And when you are trying to build an enterprise and you want to do it the right way, it helps to do so with asset tailwinds and not with asset headwinds. And so I saw a generational opportunity. I mispriced my risk, but I was lucky that I aligned with permanent capital that wanted to create a permanent company in this business. So I think it's a unique circumstance per se. I don't necessarily think it's something that happens very frequently. But if somebody does it, it's very fulfilling. But you have to pivot. You have to learn to make the most of your learnings, and that's not an easy thing to do.
Good. There's going to be a follow-up to that, Stefano. But Irene, you obviously knew what you were getting into. Why did you decide to leave the world of Mount Sinai and get into this?
Well, I wasn't intending to join Mount Sinai, but certain circumstances, like the major recession, I graduated in 2008, and I ended up being unemployed for a very long time. So I sort of took the next job I found, and I work with my family, and so shipping has been in my life forever. My family also comes from the island in Greece, Chios, which really knows two things: mastic, and shipping. So if you yourself are not in like a seafarer or sailor, you know someone who is. And so my whole life sort of revolved around that. My grandfathers, both of them, sailed when they were 15. And then my father sailed, my uncle sailed, my cousin sailed, until my dad started the business. And funny, after I graduated, I was pretty adamant about not joining the family business. I did not want to have anything to do with it. I was very, focused on doing something new, but we don't live in a vacuum. We don't always get what we, think we're going to get. So I moved, I pivoted, I worked for Sinai for 3 years, and that was a really good experience. But then shipping has a way of reeling you right back in. And I figured we should really try it. My background in history and international relations sort of primed me for the industry without consciously doing it. So I thought, why not give it a shot? And I've been there now for 7 years. So, and we're still here, so yay. It's good.
Yeah. George?
So I think from my perspective, it isn't so much what got me in, but what keeps me in. Mm-hmm. And I think I don't know of any other career path, let's say, that combines more unique careers within one than shipping. I think we can all say I don't think there's a single boring day that we ever have, because there are so many things to look at, even from the financial side or the operational side or the development side, or sort of, and so, and it makes it worthwhile. I think certainly for kind of multi-generational families, there is always going to be an inherent kind of struggle between the generations, and the handover is something that always needs to be sort of planned and I think a little bit pulled, perhaps. But staying in this business and staying with it, I think, gives you a remarkable view over the way global flows work and an understanding of how bits of the world are connected together.
Very good. DJ, shipping and U.S. flag nonetheless, so.
Yeah, it's funny. So I had a conversation with a colleague today, and we actually were talking about this same question, like, why did we decide to get into this industry? There's so much stress and so much pressure, and margins are so hard to come by. And then we just kind of agreed that we were both equally brainwashed, and this was the only thing that we knew. But in all seriousness, I think the first tanker that I stepped foot on, I was about 4 years old, so I did grow up around it, but that didn't necessarily resonate with me until I was 15 in a U.S. history class, and I had to do a presentation on family lineage, and then I read memoirs from my great-grandfather, our company founder, and then I decided to start interning that summer as soon as I got my license and I could drive myself to work. So began working very much from the ground up, as a filing clerk, kind of whatever. And then went to college and then spent another 4 years working there, and I felt like I'd reached this plateau and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and it was maybe I was informationally limited. So I went back to school, and when I was in school, I got my MBA with a focus in supply chains and analytics, and I worked on a pilot program with a colleague who kind of shared this vision of a greener, brighter, cleaner United States flag shipping. And then that's when the light switch flipped on to me that, I was really at this unique position where I could leverage and harness both, computer technology and information systems with actual tangible information and experience that people have, with 100 years from my family's business or just the last several hundred years of the industry itself. I feel like this panel, we're uniquely positioned where we kind of speak both languages, the age before us with all of their experience, and then also the next age where we're talking about autonomous shipping and AI developments. So I feel like it's definitely the right time for us to be situated where we are.
So DJ, to somebody who does not come from a shipping family, would you actually recommend to them to get into ship owning? And if not ship owning per se, should they get into shipping in general, in any capacity?
It's a loaded question, but as just to echo what was said earlier, it's every single day is different, and multiple industries and economies rely on shipping and utilize shipping, and yet it's something that the ordinary citizen doesn't really think about in their everyday life. You just kind of have a finished product, and it just arrives at your door, and you don't know how it got there, but you don't really care. And so it's such an integral part of the supply chain, and I just kind of like having that much significance and that much information about how it is that, a finished good ends up at your door, or what kind of energy you utilize. So for me, it's changing every single day, and I would recommend it.
Okay. How about you, Stefane?
Well, it is true that every single day is different, but it's also true in the long run that is something that gets compensated for. And if you are very short term, or you think that you are enamored by the history of Greek shipping and which, as you know, a lot of European shipping has been subsidized by tax indirectly, right? So, which is a competitive advantage. This is a different business if you want to do it U.S. based and paying full freight, no pun intended. In your corporate governance, your green technologies that we talked about. So you need to be invested for the long run. I think shipping is a good fit for people who need and want international in their career. It is something where it's an industry where you can develop opportunities at a small to medium-sized scale. You don't need to have $200 million to make an investment here. You can do a lot of roll-ups and a lot of small opportunities with less capital, but it's valuable, good cash flowing permanent businesses. but you have to be internationally plugged. You have to be 24/7. You have to respect people. You don't know who's going to give you an opportunity. You cannot be arrogant about it. I think the days of the grandeur are definitely adjusted, as they should be. I think it was overextended, but also the industry does need to get to a point where equity ownership is rewarded more for its operational risk.
That's a good point. So I would like to touch upon some of the topics that we discussed throughout the day, and I think a very important one is technology, of course, but from a different angle. So technology has led to connectivity and access to data. With all that, do you think that your generation is more willing to work in a collaborative manner, or do you think that sharing too much information with each other will inhibit your competitive edge? And Irene, you want to try that?
Do you know?
It doesn't matter.
I'll take a lead, and then you can sort of echo in on this. So I think one thing we all know, shipping is an ultra competitive industry, and therefore it's not necessarily doesn't necessarily lend itself, let's say, to to exchanging information, exchanging ideas. That being said, I think thematically there are some issues that are much larger than individual owners, even big individual owners, can necessarily tackle on their own. And I think also it is perhaps a feature of our generation, perhaps the generation underneath us, that are more akin, let's say, to working in a collaborative way. So in that respect, for example, one of the organizations that I work very closely with is called Amplifier Labs, which is which you alluded to earlier, which is a VC fund that was created by Christian Oldendorf. And so what we've done there, I mean, apart from the VC aspect specifically around investment in technology, we also have a sort of an inner circle, let's say, of a number of ship owners, which represents a pretty large fleet. And we're kind of like the real tail end on it. It's about 1,500 ships with about 10 owners around the table. And the idea there is to say, okay, well, what themes can we discuss which individually, and this is the really important point that we keep coming back to in technology. Shipping is principally about lowest marginal cost. So what can we do together to take the sting out of investing in an industry which is so focused around lowest marginal cost, and where we've seen historically the first movers are punished? So one of the key themes, for example, is the environment. And I could give you an idea of something, for example, that we're discussing. We're setting around a panel where we're bringing in the shipyards, et cetera, without getting too technical. If we can, for example, agree that the combustion engine will be the primary driving unit, let's say, for shipping for the foreseeable future, what changes is the fuel source. The question then becomes, okay, well, how much of the engine can we actually say is common, and what can we do to create, to simplify it, let's say, kits, which isn't something that you'd be able to change from one day to the next, but you would perhaps be able to change at a major dry docking, at a special survey, so that at least you know that the asset that you're investing in will have a 15 to 20-year life cycle. What may change is the fuel source. It could be, you could start with something that's dual fuel with LNG, and it could turn out that turns out to be a dead end for X or Y reason, and it's going to end up being methanol. So, can we change the top part of the engine? Can we agree with the shipbuilders to create the structure of the engine room in such a way that you could feasibly change the fuel containment system and the lines that run to the engine and the injectors, et cetera, et cetera? So that's an initiative that no one owner can take on his own. It's something that we need to sort of agree in common and use our market power to force the shipyards to think differently about themselves. I should point out that there is a template here, and the template in many ways is the aviation industry. And the aviation industry has certain features that propel it ahead of shipping, in the sense that it's a duopoly effectively of builders. You have a very organized legal framework. You have the way the regulators and the operators, et cetera, they can sit down around the table and agree very ambitious targets. including, for example, I think they've agreed a 1.5% reduction in fuel consumption annually going forward. They want to reduce CO2 by 50% by 2050, and they have the framework to be able to achieve that. We in shipping, we're sort of chaotically globalized, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes much harder. So the impetus for consolidation of thinking process, I think, is very, very much there. Now, if I sort of change tack slightly and I look at how we're implementing technology on a day-to-day basis, so we kind of wear, in our company, in the group, we wear three hats. There's stuff that we do, a lot of stuff that we do that's focused around the secondary loan market, and there's a lot of stuff that we do around tech management, and then there's the commercial side. So I'll just give you like three main headlines, let's say. So in the secondary market, for example, we're looking at AI algorithmic views of compliance and how we can better monitor fleets and owners, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole chapter around that, and I'll sort of leave that for later. You have things around the tech management. We have cooperative projects with Shell, which also other owners are involved in. And there we try to look at technologies that will improve safety, awareness on the bridge, that will sort of take the sting out of, particularly around human error. And then you have the commercial management side. And I think, I think Martino's company, Signal Maritime, for example, has done some enormous strides in big data analytics, but they're not the only ones. And I think if you look at the way the trend is going, I expect that in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to be seeing that kind of technology sort of very, very widespread. I'll put an end to it now.
That was good. I'll just add that shipping, as I feel, at least from a smaller owner's perspective, is very secretive. We're not willing to share information. We hold on to it and cradle it and hope that no one finds out. But obviously there's a trend, and we've been listening about it all day, what we're going to do with all this data we're collecting and how that's actually going to help boost, move the industry in a different direction. So I feel like it's inevitable. I feel like my generation here is much more open-minded to sharing and being more collaborative and not being afraid to get some more insight from other players as well, as opposed to holding on to I think we can all help each other. So I think that is in our future. Now, I don't know how long that's going to take to happen. I think it's going to be slow in going. But obviously, as we heard from earlier panelists, there is a new wave, and it's definitely coming. So.
Good. Well, speaking of things that are coming, but perhaps are already here, actually, I think recently this discussion about ESG, the conversation has shifted from why should we do it, ESG and diversity questions, why should we do it, to how should we achieve it, except perhaps for the view of Larry's financial advisor friend, who does not think so much about ESG. But Irene, I would like to hear a little bit from you about diversity and how important it is to you, and how can we do better, especially since you represent a smaller size private company.
I think diversity is important in every industry. And obviously there even in every, we're seeing a trend even in that, like how to make your company more diverse, corporate diversity. Personally, specifically in shipping, I think we need to discuss gender diversity. And I would say that's a pretty important topic for me. I was researching numbers, and unfortunately there are not that many numbers, but I learned that only 2% of 1.5 million seafarers are women. 2%, that's a very low number. Obviously, shipping is male-dominated like other industries, and I know that there is a shift in that. Obviously, there's so much more we can do, whether it's education, whether it's acknowledging the value of women's capabilities. Earlier, and now we're talking about technological advancements, digitalization. All these are opportunities in the industry to bring in new talent and invest in human capital, and especially with people who have different backgrounds that are not maritime related. You know, I think our future is going to be using every little bit of, you know, different pieces that are going to be able to sort of converge and make us, you know, move forward, you know, being a little bit more mindful that it doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter your ethnicity. Shipping is the most multicultural industry. Everyone is involved. So it's really becoming a little bit more open-minded on that, retaining your workforce and encouraging women to get involved and welcoming that. So if you have girls, tell them to get into shipping. You know.
Stephanie, what is your view?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit of a paradox that an industry that is as definitionally multicultural as shipping can have such patches of prejudice as well in it. And I think maybe the better ways that give you a little bit of a tangible example how I have lived ESG, right? And the G piece, the governance piece, is why I got in this business along with the asset opportunity I mentioned before. The environment, I think, is for the right reason the number one issue, at least for one of the parties currently in power. It is a very, very important issue, and Europe is ahead of the U.S. on this matter, and I think the U.S. ought to catch up quickly. We are exercising it in terms of our company by installing real-time monitoring of our fuel consumption on our ships and having real-time optimization. So we're not going to do after-the-fact interpretation of the data. The captain is going to adjust every 0.3 knots as needed every 15 minutes to make sure the burn curve of the engine is optimal. Now, the S piece, the social piece, I think that's where our generation here has massive responsibility. And I think it comes in two ways. One is the social piece internally. How do we foster cultures, work cultures? That is in our control. That part is in our control. And you do this, I think, partially by equity sharing. That's something that's not really prevalent in this business, especially because it's fragmented and private. So if we lay out to the people that work for us that egalitarianism and being aware of I don't want to say microaggressions per se, but a female employee in our organization needs to feel like she gets the same attention from the 60-year-old port captain who's traditional, right? And that's part of the equity sharing mentality that needs to be given and mandated by the leadership of the company. I think the second piece is things that are outside our control. And I think on that front, our generation has a real responsibility to speak up. And I will tell you a very short, a little painful story that I experienced a year ago at CMA during a dinner, where going toward my table, as I was before everybody gets seated, I see someone who, as another owner, I learned later, who, as he was walking toward the table, touched, or I want to say, the ponytail of the waitress coming to the table. I don't know. I don't think other people saw it. I was actually stunned myself. I thought I didn't see it the right way. So I go up to her pretty much right away, and I say, "Did that gentleman, touch your hair?" And she says to me, "No, it's okay. It's okay." Clearly, like trying to hold up her tears. And I said, "I'm very sorry you had to experience that. I apologize on his behalf." And then the next morning, I called the host of the event. I told him, FYI, this happened. I think at a minimum, you should let this gentleman know so he's not embarrassing himself going forward. So I think what we need to do as a generation here is to speak up and to be proactive. And one of those things, it requires effort, obviously, right? It requires uncomfortable conversations. But if we don't do it, especially when we lead our companies, then who else is going to do it?
Good. I'm glad you did. George and DJ, this is for you, and we're going to stay on the ESG topic a little bit more technical, I guess, because I want to touch on the environmental aspect of it. So obviously, all these regulations have played a major role on decision-making for ship owners. And I would like to know how they have impacted your respective companies. And do you think the company should just react to regulations in general, or they have to take it a step further always? DJ, you want to start?
Sure. I don't think that there's any time to react. You can't wait until you get to the moment where you need to react, because then your costs are building up so high that it may put you out of business, depending on what those costs may be. But just kind of the way that, we always need to be pushing the boundaries of what is regulatory standard and where is the regulation going to go, because I don't think that, at least in my lifetime, regulations have lessened or gone away for certain things, the environment in particular. And then just kind of one more fact to add on that is, in the free market economy, the players who cut the corners, it basically, the player who's going to be the fastest service provider, most reliably, and at the lowest cost is going to win the day. And when you get into things like environmental and safety, if you cut corners, then you're going to escalate your costs so significantly. And it pays to be at the forefront and have the best safety management system, the best environmental culture, so that you have the longest life of the asset, possible, that you're able to attract and retain the best talent, and that you're able to satisfy your customers and make all stakeholders happy. So you always have to be pushing the boundary of what's regulatory and what's coming.
George?
I think this topic, it infuriates me and it frustrates me in equal measure. And the reason why it does this is because I think primarily, if we look at the implementation of environmental regulation, there's a couple of things to say. To begin with, I think that there's a generational gap and an informational gap. I think there are, people who are sort of much less sensitive to the idea of needing, let's say, to contribute to the environmental profile. I think, by the way, I should say that shipping's environmental profile, at least as far as CO2 emissions are concerned, are actually not bad, but the fixes for emissions are quite easy, and the fix, of course, that we're doing now with the shift to 2020 fuels and the reduction of sulfur. I'll give you just a couple of easy statistics. So while we're about 2.5% of global emissions, and we move about 97% of the world's goods, that's why I say actually, in that respect, I think we are by far the most efficient mode of transport. On the other hand, until today, we have been producing the 54,000 blue water ships produce about 10 billion cars worth of NOx and 1.5 billion cars worth of SOx. That's enormous. And the change isn't that difficult to do. And yet, we seem to move as an industry at the pace of the slowest participants, because there is so much resistance to, and then this creates this uneven implementation. And the problem from a sort of pragmatic and financial point of view is that you see how first movers get disadvantaged. So the people who fitted ballast water systems first, they were by far the most expensive systems. And in fact, when the US government regulations finally came out, it turns out that a lot of the systems that were fitted were redundant. They had to scrap them and start all over again. That's outrageous. The same thing now, where we're seeing this sort of uneven implementation between, creating, let's say, these mini refineries on board in the form of a scrubber. So we have to sort of separate out the emissions on board the ship, instead of saying, look, we're going to do this at the point at which the fuel is created, because that's logically the most evident point to do it. And then you have, people basically competing on environmental legislation, and that is just wrong. We shouldn't compete on things like the environment. We should compete on the quality of our service and the way we, provide to our stakeholders, et cetera, not on these, big issue themes like the environment. So I don't know if I've sort of twisted and turned around there, but,
You did, and I actually want to stay on a touchy subject. So, Stefan, is bigger better? We spoke about consolidation. We heard from Mike at lunch. You're a self-starter, it's a new company. What do you think?
The answer is no. I think smarter is better.
Good.
no argument there.
Proves itself, right?
Good. Irene, a little bit of a different perspective, because there is a generation behind you. What do you think about consolidation?
I think for a small family-owned business like mine, I think it might be inevitable, actually. I think we're going to get swallowed up. But not yet, of course.
Not your generation.
No, I hope not. No, but I think there's a tide. And, we were just discussing, the business is all about low margins. And if we're going to maintain low margins, I mean, it's hard to compete with some of these very large, very, just public and even private companies that have a different set of standards backing and can manage to get a lot of these new rules and new sets of standards that everyone has been talking about to go through. So I think there is something about, I think it's inevitable, actually. But again, we'll see. There's some uncertainty,
Okay, we are running out of time. Do we have time for this twist Q&A a little bit? Basically, what I would like to do is ask the panelists to turn to each other and pick one thing that somebody said and, that piqued your interest and pose a question to your co-panelists. So it can be rather quick. It's okay? Yes. George, you want to start?
So I'll ask Steph a question. So knowing now what you know, apart from, let's say, market data, what would you have liked to have as this information that you have when you started your company? What have you learned that you wish you had known about in advance?
I think you learn that you should be more conservative in your fundamental assumptions. I would have taken a fixed rate period more precipitously and conservatively than now. Again, my company has virtually no leverage, so it's not like we don't sleep at night. But with sub 20, we're leveraged below scrap value, literally. But I do think that sometimes, the market is going to recover, is going to consolidate, whatnot. But $10,000 a day sometimes is good enough, and you can build a business that way. So I would have been a bit more conservative on my revenues.
Good. Irene?
I guess my question is George. I was reading your background, and also Jara mentioned, no, it's fine. I was just curious how you have a lot of experience in various industries, prior to doing shipping. And I'm wondering if any of these disciplines that you studied, your degrees, if there's been anything in particular that has really helped you in shipping, or that you're finding now that you didn't expect was going to help you, that sort of is helping you.
I think the background in finance helps in trying to, disambiguate how you invest in shipping and trying to be non-emotional, let's say, in the way in which you assess your business. I think shipping tends to be quite emotional, at least certainly from the family kind of perspectives, and you have to sort of push that out to have a much clearer view of where you are really in the scheme of things.
Mm-hmm. Stefano?
I'm going to ask DJ a question, even though I just met you.
Sure. Yeah.
After hearing this side of the table, do you have any inclination to enter foreign flag shipping? For the record, it's a yes or no question.
Yes, absolutely. I don't think that we're restricted to simply operating in the Jones Act. Jones Act is extremely competitive space, and it doesn't hurt to broaden our expertise and utilize that expertise in foreign markets.
Very good.
So I have a general observation and kind of question for the panel, or maybe this can just be a final thought to think about. Just kind of reading everyone's bios, it dawned on me that no one at this table has really spent time at sea or has sailing experience. So I'm wondering if we are the most suited people for, the next generation of decision making, or if, mariners who are operating today should have a bigger role in the financial decision making.
No. And that could be interpreted either way. I think that there is a significant divergence between the objectives of an asset co and the objectives of an opco. And I say this quite stridently because in my experience in our family and in our wider group, too many times I've seen operating requirements coming above or dictating an asset strategy. And this is why I've seen the sort of the wax and wane of fortunes, let's say, over the generations. I think that you need to have people that are very clear about the operating strategy and what should be followed. But ultimately, decisions, financial decisions on whether you invest or disinvest from an asset class, that needs to be divorced completely from the operational requirement.
I don't fully agree with George on the. You clarified it, but on the no answer, because I think ultimately it gets down to leadership. Any industry that you're in, look at what's happening in China now. Supply chains are hampered, right? So people are interconnected by default. So leadership matters. So someone can go on the ships and can find out if the crew is saying the truth or not, right? Can have relationships with the crew, doesn't think they're going to lose their job if something is wrong. Can have transparency through the communication systems to know if an alert is on the ship, and what type of diligence the onshore staff is doing. So I think it is a business that we will not be seeing any of our Filipino or Ukrainian or captains being ship owners anytime soon. That is the reality of the business. But the onus is on us to have the information and to show up on the ships and to develop the culture that we need to get the right answers from the crew. So the answer is perhaps, but it depends on the person.
Good. No time for Q&A, but the panelists will, of course, stick around for cocktail hour. So please, any questions you have, you feel free to reach out to them. Concluding the conference.